to Conversations with Jacqueline A. Hines. Today I'm going to be speaking to David Truswell, and our conversation is going to be on the impact of dementia on Black and minority ethnic and migrant communities. Hi, David. Thank you for joining us and welcome. Before we start into our conversation, just tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, currently I'm the Executive Director of an organisation called Dementia Alliance for Culture Ethnicity that I started up after a conversation with colleagues back in 2016. And I'm also a trustee of a dementia organisation called Culture Dementia UK that I've been involved in for about 3 or 4 years. Prior to that, amongst other things, I'd headed up the implementation of the London Dementia Strategy back in 2009 when it was first launched, working with all the PCTs across London, and subsequent to that I've worked in various roles as a project manager or programme manager generally across the fields of dementia, mental health.
Okay. Oh, really interesting. You must be really busy.
Yeah, really. I mean, probably too busy. I mean, I've got a long history of working in the field of complex mental health problems within NHS, social services and the voluntary sector. And I think at this point in my career, it's good to be able to bring to bear the variety of experience that I have to support service improvements. Basically, I mean, what I'm really keen on across the board is having the best possible services that we can for people living with dementia.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. So, talking about dementia, what do you think the impact is on the Black communities?
Well, I spend a lot of time now kind of going around talking to different groups, whether it's people living with dementia, people supporting people living with dementia, people who are just interested in knowing more, professional groups, social workers, nurses, GPs, all kinds of different clinicians, specifically about some of the issues that are faced by the Black and minority ethnic community when it comes to coping with dementia. And the kind of talks that I give can, last from, but really to kind of get a full sense of the detail of some of the issues, I'd probably be nattering on at least for a kind of 3/4 of an hour or an hour. So I'm going to try and encapsulate it in a few headline bullet points that's far less than 3/4 of an hour.
Yeah.
So I think that often basically people are scared of going to get some help with dementia because they're frightened of what it might mean, and they're frightened of how other people might respond to them once they find out about them living with dementia. When they go to, really, it should be when they get the first worries about the kind of things that might be happening, like the memories persistently not as good as they are familiar with it. They forget how to do routine tasks. They forget where they've put things. They begin to think people are stealing their belongings because they keep forgetting where they put them. When they begin to talk to their GP, sometimes the GP, when they do standard dementia tests, they don't necessarily pick up some of the issues that, particularly people from a minority culture where English isn't their first language, there may be problems about making some early determination. And it's that early determination that decides whether the GP refers the person on to memory clinic. So there are often long delays about going to see the GP. There may be further delays because the GP isn't quite sure, particularly if they're working with somebody where they're having to work through a translator because somebody's command of English isn't as good as might be useful when they're trying to do those determinations. So there's delays because of that. They go to memory clinic. Again, if there's language issues, there may be problems in making a diagnosis. The diagnosis itself, I think, people don't just go to a memory clinic and they're there for half an hour and the clinician says, oh yeah, you've got A, B and C. It can take many weeks or months to kind of get the full picture of what the problems are. Sometimes it might not be dementia. There are things people can get that cause symptoms that are similar to dementia, but are more like they can be things to do with the effects of infections. They can be things to do with depression and bereavement and a whole host of other issues. So people have to sift through to make sure if what people are presenting with is dementia. Can they get a diagnosis? They may get some advice about support services. Then when it comes to, again, particularly for people from Black and minority ethnic communities, the kinds of support services that are available may be generic and not tuned finely enough to help them. A good example would be somebody says, oh, go to a day service because that's going to help mixing with people. Well, if they're not like you, it won't help. If they're doing reminiscence exercises that say, oh, well, do you remember when you were young and, life was a kind of homicide bit? Well, it wasn't for people who didn't grow up in the UK. It was something else. And often the people who are running reminiscence services don't have any knowledge of what the something else might be, don't have any materials, information, and other resources that can help people's memories.
Okay.
And so people can feel they get less of a deal, a good deal when they look at supports. There are some good support services that are usually run by or partnered by voluntary agencies working with particular communities. A couple of, obviously, one of those, the one I'm involved in, Culture Dementia UK, for example, runs its own helpline. Another organisation I know of, Nubian Life, works specifically mainly with older African Caribbean people, and there's a whole host of different interventions and reminiscent work, working through people's earlier experiences. And then through the whole process of, as people will, through dementia, lose a lot of their faculties, their access to materials and information that will help them remember can be limited. An organisation based in the Midlands called the Pill Network has done some great work in developing materials and kind of memory jogging quizzes for people, particularly from an African Caribbean background. But those kind of organisations are few and far between. Often then people, because they struggle to understand it, family supporters and carers struggle to understand dementia, there may be issues within their particular understanding of their culture around, dementia gets caused by evil spirits, or dementia gets caused by people being bad in the early life, that make it difficult for them to be as supportive maybe as they would be if they didn't have these notions. Yeah. And then also, I think, just to very quickly go towards the end of life period, because dementias are a terminal illness. And I think across all cultures, really, people have very specific ideas about how they want things to be arranged towards the end of their lives. And again, I think services often don't think about this and don't think about how they're going to support the person living with dementia and their family and loved ones through the period toward the end of their lives, so that again, the conversation I was having with somebody the other day, what if you want a Buddhist funeral ceremony?
True.
How's that going to work?
Yeah,
You know?
yeah.
And if it's no good, in a sense, suddenly kind of thinking about that as somebody's in their final days, really, you want to have that kind of consideration in play months ahead, because the actual arrangements and there's a limited number of organisations that could support you with something like that, and arranging it, sorting out, making sure the right people are there at the right time, takes weeks and weeks.
Yeah, so it's really about having the right kind of knowledge bases to tap into for specific. So, I mean, who would you say was affected most by, because dementia, as we know, is a carer of no culture. So who, in your opinion, would be affected most by, or seems to be affected most?
I think some of the kind of work that I've been doing recently, writing about the impact on specific minority communities in the UK. I've tried to shed more light on some of the existing research around particularly the African Caribbean community, where increasingly we can see that there's more risk of people developing dementia. Probably that's due to a higher risk of vascular dementia, but I think we still need to kind of figure out a bit more what's going on there. Also, more indication coming through from research about higher risk to the South Asian community.
Right.
From some of the issues that are shared with the African Caribbean community, general health issues like high blood pressure, more diabetes, more risks around heart disease and prevalence and stroke. I think, and also the one of the Irish national organisations, the Irish in Britain, do think that there's a higher risk to the Irish community, although there's less research evidence around about that as yet, and we both think that's due to the very poor ethnicity recording of people going to hospital. And I think that there's frankly a possibility that one component of that might be because the Irish population we know have high levels of general poor health, general poor access to services, and it may be that people are dying from those other illnesses at an earlier stage before they are likely to kind of die of dementia. I mean, that's kind of depressing idea, I appreciate, but I think that we need to explore the data more to see if that is the case. One hopes it isn't, but I think, as I say, both myself and the Irish in Britain suspect that there's a huge gap in understanding about what's happening with the Irish community in relation to dementia.
Okay, thanks for that, David. So, I mean, talking about capturing and garnering the information with the National Health Service, how do you think they fit into this? And, if the issues that are arising are not garnered in and not recorded, what can they do, or why aren't they actually recording it effectively?
I've said in some of the things that I've written for different journals, or some of the briefings I've done for the Race Equality Foundation, that it's not a new idea that dementia is the most pressing health economy challenge of the 21st century. I think it should be an absolute priority for the NHS. I don't see that it's an absolute priority right now. I don't think it's sufficient to simply say it's one of X high priorities. In terms of its impact on service use alone. You're talking in some studies about something like 20% of acute hospital beds being occupied by people living with dementia. In some studies estimated something like 23 to 24 billion pounds per year of the health economy invested in dementia support. This dwarfs the kind of inpatient bed use and the economic impact of absolutely any other major disease. This is a terminal illness for which we have pretty much no substantial cure or substantial treatment right now. So my belief is it's not one of a number of priorities we must do something about. It's the absolute priority for the 21st century health economic agenda. I think the NHS needs to do more in terms of integrating its service response to dementia with both social care and voluntary sector organisations. It needs to recognise dementia is practically always a complex issue because many people living with dementia are also elderly and frail, and as well as frailty, have multiple long-term health issues. So very few people living with dementia are actually just living with dementia. They're living with dementia plus a whole bunch of other stuff. Where people living with dementia themselves may well be being cared for by other people who are over the age of 65, the age of 70, who have their own long-term health issues. Okay, I think that the integration between health, social care and voluntary sector is essential to delivering good quality dementia care. I think we need to see dementia across a continuum of provision, from that early stage when people are worried and frightened, don't know what to do, through to the terminal illness stage. And rather than just kind of supply interventions at particular points on that pathway, independent of each other, that all the services need to recognise that that's the journey that people living with dementia are faced with, and recognise the kind of transitions that they will be taking through that journey, and cooperate, particularly in terms of transferring information with people as they progress. So, you know, when people get to the stage where they're going into, let's say, in some cases, not all cases, certainly, into a residential care home, they're not suddenly scrubbing around looking for information as if this was a new case, when that person and that family have been living with that illness for the last kind of 7, 8, 10 years.
Right. Okay. So would you say that there's an endemic problem? And if there is there any evidence out there?
I think there's okay, again, to be blunt about it, my view is that the state of research, particularly in respect of those communities of the black and minority ethnic communities that I earlier mentioned that are at higher risk, the state of research is frankly appalling. I think that there should be targeted research at high risk community. The numbers involved in this case are substantial. The all-party parliamentary group, in a report back in 2013, said that there's around 25,000 people from black and minority ethnic communities at that point living with dementia. The likelihood is that that's an underestimation, because that assumed that black and minority ethnic communities were at a similar risk of dementia than to white communities. Certainly some of the research in the last 7 years or so has tended to confirm that some of these groups that I've mentioned, Irish, African, Caribbean, South Asian, are at a higher risk. I think that if there is a group of people that are higher risk of a well-known particular illness, then it would be important to have a research focus on that group to understand how those risks play out in terms of increasing the likelihood of people developing dementia, and also as a very useful population to explore potential supporting interventions, treatments, and potential cures with. So there isn't enough focused research on the communities. That would help us to understand what's happening. Where some research has been done, like a recent study done by the UCL that's got a lot of publicity in the mainstream papers, it was evident that they felt that there were more people from certain Black and African Caribbean communities accessing service. At the same time that they also said in their research paper that they felt that there was an underdiagnosis of people from both Black and African Caribbean communities and also South Asian communities, and that was something that there needed to be much more research on. I previously mentioned the Irish community. There's a huge issue in terms of trying to find out from either hospital statistics or primary care statistics of what the incidence of dementia actually is and what the diagnostic rates are compared with different ethnic populations, because the research, the actual raw data is so poor, and people, when people are supposed to have, when they're taking basic information, when people go into hospital or when they see their GPs. Okay. In my view, insofar as there's a bit of evidence around from the UK, what that evidence indicates is that there's an underdiagnosis of people from particular communities where we know there is a higher risk of dementia. Therefore, I think the mainstream services and the research community need to explore that more, to understand it better, to at least ensure that diagnostic rates are equitable between the mainstream white community and people from Black and minority ethnic communities. We know from the last census that people, Black and minority ethnic origin categories, if you like, for the census, 20% of people identified themselves from Black and minority ethnic communities. So you're talking about 20% of the population that the NHS is intended to support and care for.
Right.
I think that over and above that, what we need to look at is getting beyond small scale, mainly qualitative explorations of what people need from services, the kind of information that will help, to looking at larger scale interventions that test out what's going to help with people. So, for example, the DASA organisation that I mentioned, that I'm the executive director of, in common with a number of other voluntary organisations, including Culture Dementia UK, as I mentioned earlier, worked together with Health Education England a couple of years ago to produce a short information film about dementia for the African Caribbean community. Now, with some of the work that I've done, Dace's done, and colleagues within the voluntary sector, and also with some of the work that Health Education England have done, we've managed to, if you look on YouTube, it's been a while since I checked on YouTube, but the last time I checked, a couple of months ago, that video had been viewed something like 5,500 times.
Right. Okay.
Partly that's because we got out and kind of promoted it. I've seen some very good videos produced by small community groups about the impact of dementia on a number of different communities, including the African Caribbean community. Those videos, I know from talking to the groups, have not been cheap to make, and they spent a lot of time getting the funding to make them. But again, if you look on YouTube, they may, in some cases, they're viewed by less than 45, 50 people. That information is out there. It could be put to good use very straightforwardly. It's already very professionally made.
Mm-hmm.
What happens is that essentially it metaphorically sits in a drawer or in a desk.
Yeah.
You know, what we've shown with the Finding Patients video, you know, which wasn't cheap to make, very good video. It's no good just putting it on some kind of website and hoping people will see it. You have to go out and promote it. And certainly, of course, we'd have liked to have more than 5,500 people look at the video, but it's a reasonably respectable number. Other people have produced good quality information videos aimed at different communities, and because they don't have the dissemination apparatus to do anything with it, it's kind of sat on their website, or it'll sit on some national organisation's website, you know, on a web page somewhere that you really have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out and navigate.
Right.
So I think it's about utilising some of the good work that's actually found on the ground, some of the qualitative work, whether it's discussions with individuals, whether it's things like videos, whether it's things like, again, I referred earlier to the Pearl Network, some of the materials and information that they've developed, and looking at how on a larger scale that things like that can help people to, you know, when they're thinking about, worrying about stuff happening, help people to decide to go to see their GP. And if they feel that their GP is kind of prevaricating or not quite sure, feel confident about saying, well, look, I think this is what it is, and I'd like to be referred to a memory clinic. And I can't understand why you're reluctant to do that. I mean, I don't see why you shouldn't have that conversation with your GP about a potentially fatal illness. And also for the, particularly in the earlier post-diagnostic phase, for people to know about organisations that are out there, particularly in respect to their cultural needs, that they can engage with, so that for people, you know, that feel it's important, the getting, in particular, getting a diagnosis of dementia has resonance for them in relation to their faith, and feel that like they would like to get support from, you know, their local faith community, that there's links between that community and the service organisations where people can say, well, yeah, I can let somebody know in your church, or this is the church, this is the mosque, or we've got somebody who can come to talk to you, even if it's not the regular person that you talk to, but it may be important to have that conversation with somebody of your particular faith in the light of having this information. And that might be part of what's helped. So it's not going to be the case for everybody. No. But again, given we're talking about a situation where, you know, the medication has very, very, very little impact on the illness. And most of the medication that's around and seem to be successful at the moment needs to be administered very early in the progress of the illness. Many people from minority communities delay going for help, so that the window within which they might usefully be able to have support from medication, it's usually narrow, and often they've missed it. So it's all about social support, emotional support, and for many people, support through their faith is what helps them get through. And I think if that's the case, then they need to be enabled to get that support. It's not going to be the same for everybody, but
no, obviously not. But it seems like you're doing a lot of initiatives. What other things are you doing to raise awareness? And how can others support this movement if they're interested as well?
Well, we've got, I think that an important resource and port of call is the DACE website. That's www.dace.com. And we've got on that website our call to arms, if you like, call to action, with several bullet points outlining what we'd like to see happen in terms of services and what we think the contribution could be of organisations like DACE in the not-profit sector. There's also on the website an opportunity to participate in our information sharing through our Facebook and Twitter links, or to kind of contact me by email if people have got any other queries that are over and above what they can see on the website or what they can access through the social media. I will respond to email contacts. I don't work directly on a casework basis, but if I can provide information and support, and usually I can, that will signpost people to organisations that can help people, then that's what I do. And I take a lot of direct inquiries across the board, again, from people who are living with dementia, people who are supporting people living with dementia, clinicians working with people living with dementia from Black and minority ethnic communities, a whole host of things. And we, I mean, I'm kind of constantly going around the world doing presentations about dementia in Black and minority communities. My next scheduled one is down in Brighton in November, where I'll be talking about why there's no such thing as a hard to reach community, and why the whole idea of communities looking after themselves is simply a convenient, misleading myth for services. So that's the kind of thing I do individually or as part of the work that I do with DACE. We get involved, as we are at the moment, in a discussion with Bristol University about developing a piece of research work looking to help big people from South Asian communities keep engaged with memory services after, because often what happens is somebody gets a diagnosis of dementia and they, essentially are so devastated that they never go back for any of the support services. And so we're trying to look at what's going to help people to continue to go back and get that support that is available for services, and also how the service itself can be refined to provide a better quality. We're doing some work with the oh gosh, I can't remember. There's a long name for the regional clinical research network, looking with them at how they can encourage more people from minority communities to get involved in research. There's the ongoing development of DACE as an organisation to look at ways that we can get involved in our own funded projects, but we don't wait to be kind of told what to do. So we've just done a piece of our own work with another organisation called the Dementia Exchange Network, based in the Midlands, where we're looking. We have looked already. We did a Survey Monkey survey that we disseminated across primarily Black and minority ethnic community social media to ask people what they thought would be best in terms of the information provided for dementia. And we got over a 3-month period about 200 replies. 84% of those people identified themselves as from a Black and minority ethnic
Oh,
communities.
right.
Now,
Okay.
compared
Wow.
with what happens with mainstream research when they send out these kind of questionnaires, they kind of think they're lucky if they get back sort of 5 or 10% people from Black and minority ethnic communities. So, you know, we know we can show that you can do this, and we know that you can do this for a relatively modest outline. And part of what we're keen to do as an organisation is simply to demonstrate that it is a question of taking initiative, being innovative, and understanding the communities we're working with in order to make progress, and that community knowledge resides in communities, and it's a valuable resource that needs to be invested in and tapped into. And really, again, bluntly, that the rhetoric around how difficult communities are to engage with is simply an excuse for a lack of imagination.
Right. Okay. David, wow. It's such a knowledge download, and just to sort of like bring it sort of like all to sort of like crystallize and to conclude it, what encouragement would you give somebody who's got a cause and who's passionate? How can they go about making their voice heard?
Absolutely don't stop. Absolutely refuse to be shut up. And also try and kind of, and I think particularly for the way that we're looking to evolve days is to share alliances and support of people who also support your message. Because why we came together for days was to say, look, we're sick of being a lone voice, saying, you know, this community, whatever other community it is, isn't getting good enough resources. What are you doing about it? And to move from being that lone voice, whether it's on the conference floor or on Twitter or anywhere else, to even before we developed as a community interest company, as simply a network of committed folk to say, okay, yeah, it's 21st century. We can get together. We can decide that we have a call to action. We are a collection of reasonably substantial. I mean, at that stage, there are about a dozen community organisations willing to sign up to the call to action. We've all got networks that will support our call to action. So I mean, just to get that going, were sufficiently influential to get at least recognised by the Department of Health Dementia Group as an important contribution. Sure, it didn't change the world, but I think it was the first time anybody had seen from a grassroots level, not simply, as I say, although that was a powerful enough statement, that the 12 community organisations say, hang on a minute, you need to look at this. But actually to say, you know what, we've got friends in reasonably significant places as well. And so this is not just signed by us, it's also signed by a whole bunch of our friends who support this.
Right.
And they're people like, you know, Lord X, Lady Y, they're organisations at the level of some of the Royal Colleges, some significant elements of their health profession. And so it wasn't something that could be lightly dismissed. And then to build on from that in relation to developing some sense of, if you want to call it a kind of brand identity, where people knew what we stood for, so that if we pitch up, as it were, for a conference or a presentation, or asked to contribute to a conversation or a consultation, they have a good idea of what they're going to get. And you know, we're not going to be impolite but we're going to be clear about this issue because it has such a profound effect on so many people's lives.
Right. Brilliant. Thank you so much, David, for taking the time out to have this conversation with me. And I'm sure we'll have more conversations in the future. I'd like to find out more about what DACE is doing, what other initiatives you're bringing out to bring dementia to the fore, and to find out how we can actually support individuals in the community. So once again, thank you very much, and we'll
Thank you
speak
for having
again.
me.
Thank you.